I never expected a single knock on the cabin door to unravel the fragile piece I had been clinging to for years. The snow had been falling softly all afternoon, blanketing the Blue Ridge Mountains in a quiet white that made everything feel muffled and far away from the rest of the world. Yet inside that rented cabin, the silence between family members had started to feel louder than any storm. My name is Lauren Bennett, and I am 35 years old. For as long as I can remember, I had chosen to stay quiet whenever my mother's words cut too deep, or when my aunt joined in with her own sharp observations about how I was raising my daughter or managing my marriage. I told myself that silence was the price of keeping some kind of connection, even if it left me feeling hollow afterward. That night at the retreat, everything I had been swallowing finally started to push back. It was just after dinner when the knock came. My husband had taken our daughter upstairs to read her a story and get her settled for bed, leaving me alone in the small kitchen area with the dishes. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door to find Dorothy Jenkins standing there, the older woman from the cabin next door. She'd introduced herself the day we arrived, offering us fresh bread she had baked, and warning us that the road could get icy after dark. Now her face looked pinched with worry, and she kept glancing over her shoulder toward the main lodge, where my mother and my aunt were still sitting by the fire. "Lauren, I'm sorry to bother you so late," she said quietly, her voice low enough that it would not carry. "I was out on my porch getting some air, and I heard your mother and your aunt talking. They weren't trying to be quiet about it. They were planning something for tomorrow night at the community winter gathering down at the main hall. They said they were going to make sure everyone knew the truth about you, about how you've been struggling, and how you've been keeping things from the family. They called it putting you in your place once and for all, so you would stop being so difficult." The words landed like cold water down my back. My mind started racing before I could even thank her. I pictured my mother's face when she got that particular look, the one that said she had already decided I was the problem that needed fixing. I thought about my aunt nodding along the way she always did when my mother needed backup. I thought about our daughter hearing any of it, or my husband having to stand there and watch while they turned me into the unstable one in front of strangers and distant relatives who had come for the weekend. Dorothy must have seen the shock on my face because she reached out and touched my arm gently. I don't know what they think they know, but it didn't sound right to me. "You and your husband seem like good people. Our daughter is sweet. I just thought you should know before they spring it on you in front of everyone." I managed to nod and thank her, my voice sounding strange, even to me. She left quickly, disappearing into the snow and the dark between the cabins. I closed the door and stood there for a long moment, my hands gripping the edge of the counter while my thoughts tumbled over each other. Part of me wanted to march straight to the main lodge and demand to know what they were thinking. Another part of me, the part that had stayed quiet for so long, whispered that maybe I was overreacting again, that maybe I had misunderstood what Dorothy heard. If you have ever felt your stomach drop because someone who is supposed to love you has decided to turn your private pain into public business, you know the exact kind of chaos that starts spinning inside your head. I tried to breathe through it, but the quiet of the cabin only made the noise in my mind louder. I found my husband in the small loft bedroom, our daughter already asleep, with her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. He looked up when I came in, and I could see the question in his eyes before he even spoke. "Everything okay?" he asked softly. I wanted to tell him right then. I wanted to say that my mother and my aunt were planning to stand up in front of everyone tomorrow night and paint me as the broken one, the difficult daughter who needed to be corrected. But the words felt too big and too small at the same time. Instead, I just shook my head and said I was tired, that the drive and the cold had worn me out. He accepted it the way he always did, with quiet patience, but I could feel the worry settling between us anyway. Sleep did not come easily that night. I lay awake listening to the wind move through the trees outside and to the occasional creak of the old cabin settling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face from earlier that day, the way she had looked at me when I suggested We let our daughter choose her own activity instead of following the schedule my mother had printed out and laminated. You always have to make everything difficult. Lauren, she had said loud enough for my father and my aunt to hear. Some of us are trying to make this trip nice for everyone. Those words had stung, but I had swallowed them the way I always did. Now, knowing they were planning something bigger, something public, the sting turned into something sharper and more unsteady. I kept replaying every quiet compromise I had made over the years every time I had let a comment slide, because I did not want to ruin the holiday or upset my father or make our daughter feel the tension. Staying quiet had felt like the responsible choice. Now, it felt like I had been handing them the rope they planned to use. Morning came gray and cold. Snow still dusted the ground, and the air smelled like pine and wood smoke from the main lodge's chimney. My husband took our daughter outside to build a small snowman while I stayed in the cabin trying to decide what to do. Part of me hoped Dorothy had been wrong, that maybe she had only caught the tail end of a conversation and misunderstood. The other part of me knew better. My mother did not make idle threats, and my aunt had a way of turning even small disagreements into family-wide lessons about respect and gratitude. I found my mother in the main lodge kitchen stirring something on the stove while my aunt sat at the table with a cup of coffee. My father was in the next room reading the paper. The scene looked so ordinary, so domestic, that for a second I almost convinced myself I could still keep the peace. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" I asked, keeping my voice as even as I could. My mother did not turn around right away. When she did, her expression was already guarded. If this is about last night, Lauren, I really do not have the energy for another one of your dramatic moments. We are all trying to enjoy this trip. The words hit exactly where they were meant to. I felt my chest tighten, but I pushed forward anyway. I heard something last night. About tomorrow night at the gathering. About you and my aunt planning to talk about me in front of everyone. My aunt set her coffee cup down with a little clink that sounded too loud in the quiet kitchen. My mother's mouth tightened into the thin line I knew too well. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" she said, her voice rising just enough to carry into the next room. "There you go again." Lauren turning nothing into some kind of conspiracy. We were having a private conversation about how worried we are about you, about how you have been so on edge lately, and how it is affecting our daughter and your husband. If you would stop sneaking around and listening at doors, maybe you would understand that we are trying to help you. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. My father appeared in the doorway, the newspaper still in his hand. His face already set in the disappointed expression he wore whenever my mother and I clashed. My aunt was nodding along her eyes, flicking between us like she was watching a play she had seen before. "You have always been so sensitive." My mother continued, her voice gaining that sharp, chaotic edge it got when she felt cornered. "Even as a little girl, you would blow everything out of proportion. Now you are doing it with your own family. If you cannot handle a simple conversation about your behavior, maybe you should not have come on this trip at all." I stood there, feeling the ground shift under me. The words were the same ones she had used for years, but knowing they were the opening act for something bigger made them land differently. I could feel my husband and our daughter outside laughing in the snow, and I hated that any of this was happening while they were happy. I hated that I had stayed quiet for so long that my mother now believed she could announce my private struggles to a room full of people and call it love. My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice low. "I am not going to let you do this in front of our daughter, or in front of strangers." My mother laughed a short, bitter sound that did not reach her eyes. "There it is again, always making it about you. This is exactly why we have to do something. You cannot keep living like the whole world revolves around your feelings." The room felt like it was tilting. My father cleared his throat but said nothing. My aunt looked down at her coffee as if she had not been part of the planning. I turned and walked out. Before the tears I could feel building had a chance to fall, because I knew if I cried, It would only prove her point in her mind. Outside, the cold air hit my face and steadied me for a moment. My husband looked up from the snowman he and our daughter were building and waved. Our daughter's cheeks were pink from the cold, and she was smiling in that open way only 8-year-olds can manage. I waved back, forcing my own smile, but inside the chaos was still spinning. I'd spent years believing that staying quiet was the only way to protect the people I loved. Now it felt like the quiet had been the thing protecting my mother and my aunt instead. I did not know yet what I was going to do. I only knew that the careful silence I had maintained for so long had just cracked wide open, and I was not sure I could put it back together again. The next morning, the pressure had grown thicker. More relatives had arrived from nearby towns, filling the main lodge with voices, and the smell of soup my mother had insisted on making herself. She kept finding ways to pull our daughter into conversations with the cousins while steering me toward the edges of the room. At one point, she asked loudly enough for several people to hear whether I was still seeing that therapist I had mentioned years ago, the one she had called a waste of money at the time. The question landed like a test. I answered as calmly as I could that it was private, but she just smiled in that thin way and said some people needed extra help learning how to handle normal family life. My aunt chimed in that it was nothing to be ashamed of, that everyone could see I had been struggling lately. I caught my husband's eye across the room and saw the same tight control on his face that I felt in my own body. The room suddenly felt too small, the snow outside pressing against the windows like another layer of isolation. I slipped away after lunch under the excuse of needing air and walked the short path to Dorothy's cabin. She opened the door before I even knocked, as if she had been watching for me. Inside, it was warm and smelled like the bread she had given us the first day. She poured tea without asking and sat across from me at her small table, her hands wrapped around her own mug, like she was steadying herself too. "I saw more this morning," she said after a moment. "Your mother and your aunt were in the main lodge early before most people were up. They had some papers spread out on the table near the fireplace. I was bringing in firewood, and I heard them talking about making sure everyone understands the real situation at the gathering tonight. They mentioned wanting Stephen Hayes there too, the man who takes care of the cabins and the hall. Your mother said he could be a neutral voice, someone local who could speak to how families are supposed to work. I don't know what they think he's going to say, but it didn't sound like they were planning a simple toast." The words settled into the spinning already happening in my head. Stephen Hayes was the quiet man in his 50s who had helped us carry bags in when we arrived and had waved from his truck when he drove past earlier. He seemed kind enough, the sort of person who minded his own business and fixed what needed fixing. The idea that my mother had already pulled him into whatever they were planning made the ground feel less steady under me. I thanked Dorothy and asked if she had seen anything else. She hesitated, then said she had noticed my mother go into the small office off the main room and come out with a folder that looked like it held old photographs or documents. She did not know what was inside, but the way my aunt had smiled when my mother showed her made Dorothy uncomfortable enough to come find me again. I left her cabin with my thoughts moving even faster than before. The snow crunched under my boots as I walked back each step, feeling heavier. Part of me wanted to find Stephen Hayes right then and ask him what my mother had said to him. Another part, the part that had spent years keeping the peace, warned that confronting anyone would only give my mother more ammunition to call me dramatic. I hated how quickly that old voice still spoke up, even when I could see the trap being set in front of me. Staying quiet had kept the cycle going for so long that it now felt like the only language my mother understood. Breaking it felt like stepping off a cliff I could not see the bottom of. When I got back to our cabin, my husband was helping our daughter with her boots after the sledding. She was flushed and happy, chattering about how fast the older cousins had gone down the hill. I smiled at her and tried to keep my voice steady when I asked if she had fun. She nodded and asked if I would come with them next time. The simple question made my throat tight. I told her I would try, and she accepted it with the easy trust children still have before they learn how complicated family can become. The afternoon stretched on with more small moments that added up to something larger. My mother suggested that my husband and my father take the men out to clear a path to the main hall for tonight's gathering, leaving the women to handle the food and the children. It was phrased as helpful, but it separated me from my husband at the exact moment I needed his steady presence. My aunt kept our daughter busy with games, while my mother found reasons to pull me into conversations with arriving relatives, each one circling back to how challenging I had been as a teenager or how I had chosen to live so far away. Every comment landed with the same casual cruelty dressed up as concern. I felt the chaos inside me shifting from fear into something sharper. Something that made my hands shake when I tried to hold a cup of coffee steady. By early evening, the light outside had turned that particular winter blue that makes everything feel closer and more immediate. I was in our cabin helping our daughter change into warmer clothes for the gathering when I heard voices outside. Dorothy was standing near the path talking quietly with Stephen Hayes, who had his truck idling nearby. She caught my eye and gave a small nod, the kind that said she had more to tell me, but not here. Stephen looked uncomfortable the way people do when they have been pulled into something they did not ask for. I stepped outside for a moment, the cold biting at my face, and Dorothy came over quickly while Stephen stayed by his truck. He told me your mother asked him to say a few words tonight about family responsibility. Dorothy said, her voice low and urgent. She said it would help certain people understand what real loyalty looks like. He didn't know what she meant exactly, but he didn't like the way she kept looking at your cabin when she said it. I think they want him there as some kind of witness, so it feels more official. The information landed like another layer of snow pressing down. My mother had not just planned to speak. She'd recruited someone from outside the family to stand there and make it feel bigger, more legitimate. The chaos in my ribs tightened into something that made it hard to breathe for a second. I thanked Dorothy again and watched her walk back toward her own cabin, her shoulders hunched against the cold. Stephen gave me a polite nod from his truck before driving away, but the look on his face stayed with me. He had not wanted any part of this, yet my mother had already drawn him in. Inside the cabin, my husband was waiting. I told him what Dorothy had said, and for the first time that day, I saw real anger flash across his face before he pulled it back under control. He asked again if we should leave. This time, the question felt heavier, because I could see he was ready to do it to protect our daughter and me, even if it meant facing my mother's wrath later. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to pack the bags and drive down the mountain before the gathering started, before my mother could stand up in front of everyone and turn years of my private pain into a public lesson. But the thought of our daughter asking why we were running away, or my father's disappointed silence following us home, kept the words locked behind my teeth. Instead, I told my husband I needed one more conversation with my mother, one last attempt to stop this before it happened. He did not argue, but I could see he did not believe it would change anything. I stepped back out into the cold evening, the lights from the main lodge glowing warm through the windows, and felt the full weight of how long I had stayed quiet settle on my shoulders. The cycle had continued because I had let it. Now the cost of breaking it was staring me in the face, and I still did not know if I had the strength to pay it without losing more than I could afford. The path to the main lodge felt longer than it should have in the cold. Snow crunched under my boots with every step, and the lights glowing from the windows looked warm from a distance, but felt like they belonged to a place I no longer recognized. I could hear voices already rising and falling inside the sound of family, trying to pretend everything was normal. My mother had sent a group text earlier, saying the winter gathering was starting early because of the weather. I knew it was really because she wanted more time to set the stage for whatever she and my aunt had planned. My husband walked beside me without saying much, his hand resting lightly on my back. Our daughter skipped ahead a little excited about the hot chocolate and the stories she thought would be told. I kept my eyes on her small figure and tried to hold the storm inside me steady. Every part of me wanted to turn around, load the car, and drive away before any of this could happen. But another part, the one that had spent years staying quiet, still hoped that if I just spoke to my mother one more time, she might pull back. That hope felt smaller now, but it was still there. When we stepped inside, the heat from the big fireplace hit my face. Relatives were scattered around the room with plates of food and cups of cider. My father sat in a chair near the fire. My aunt stood by the window talking to two cousins who had arrived that afternoon, and my mother was at the front near a small table where someone had set up a microphone. Stephen Hayes stood off to the side with his hands in his pockets, looking like he would rather be anywhere else. Dorothy was there too, sitting in the back with a cup of tea, her eyes finding mine the moment I walked in. She gave me the smallest nod, the kind that said she was staying, because she had promised to be a witness if things went the way she feared. My mother spotted us and waved us over with a bright smile that did not reach her eyes. "There you are," she said loud enough for several people to turn and look. "We were starting to think you had decided to skip the family part of the trip again." The comment landed exactly as she meant it to, soft enough to sound like a joke, but sharp enough to sting. I felt our daughter glance up at me, and I forced a small smile for her sake. The next hour moved in a blur of small conversations that all seemed to circle back to the same thing. My mother kept steering talk toward how important it was for families to be honest with each other, how some people carried secrets that hurt everyone around them. My aunt nodded and added little comments about how hard it was when someone in the family refused to get the help they clearly needed. I stayed quiet, answering when spoken to, keeping my hand on our daughter's shoulder whenever she drifted close. My husband stayed near me, his presence the only steady thing in the room. Then, my mother tapped the microphone and asked for everyone's attention. The room quieted. She started with the usual things about being grateful for family and for the chance to gather in the mountains, even when the weather tried to keep us apart. People smiled and raised their cups. My father looked proud. My aunt stood beside her with that same satisfied expression she always wore when my mother was in control. Then my mother's voice changed. It softened into the concerned tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable. "But there is something heavier I need to share tonight," she said. "Some of us have been carrying burdens alone for too long, and I think it is time we brought it into the light as a family. Lauren, sweetheart, I know you have been struggling. We all see it. The anxiety, the distance you keep putting between yourself and the rest of us, the way you second-guess every decision we try to make for our daughter's sake. We love you, but love sometimes means telling the truth, even when it is hard." The room went very still. I felt every eye turn toward me. My chest tightened so fast, I had to remind myself to breathe. Our daughter looked up at me with wide eyes, and I squeezed her hand once, trying to tell her without words that I was still here. My mother kept going, her voice gaining that chaotic edge it always took on when she believed she was doing the right thing. "We have all watched you pull away," she continued. "We have watched you choose silence over honesty, and it is hurting the people who care about you most. That is why we asked Stephen to be here tonight. He sees families come and go at this retreat every season. He knows what real loyalty and real stability look like. Lauren, we want you to hear this from someone outside our family, so you cannot keep telling yourself it is just us being difficult." Stephen shifted on his feet and looked at the floor. He did not step forward. He did not say anything. The silence stretched, and for the first time I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross my mother's face. She had expected him to play his part. He clearly had no intention of doing it. Dorothy stood up from the back of the room. She did not raise her voice, but it carried anyway. "I think that is enough," she said calmly. "Some things are private for a reason. If Lauren wants to talk about her life, she will. The rest of us do not get to decide when that happens." A few heads turned toward Dorothy. My mother's mouth opened and then closed. My aunt looked like she wanted to argue, but could not find the words fast enough. I felt the storm inside me shift for the first time that night. It did not disappear, but it stopped spinning quite so wildly. I had a choice in this moment, and I could feel it clearly. I let go of our daughter's hand long enough to step forward one pace. I kept my voice steady, even though my heart was racing. I am not going to stand here and let you turn my private life into tonight's entertainment, I said. I came here because I wanted our daughter to have good memories with her family. If this is what that looks like to you, then we are done for tonight. My mother's face flushed. Lauren, you are being dramatic again. This is exactly what we were talking about. You cannot even hear concern without turning it into an attack. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I looked at my father, who was still sitting by the fire, his expression unreadable. I looked at my aunt, who would not meet my eyes. And I looked at our daughter, who was watching all of us with the confused expression of a child who had just realized the adults around her were not safe in the way she had believed. I am taking our daughter and my husband back to our cabin, I said. If anyone wants to talk to me like a person instead of a problem that needs fixing, you know where to find me. But I will not stay here for this. I took our daughter's hand again. My husband was already moving toward the door with us. We walked out without looking back. The cold air outside felt cleaner than the air inside the lodge. Snow was falling harder now, softening the edges of everything. Our daughter asked quietly if Grandma was mad at us. I told her that sometimes grown-ups disagree about what is right, and that it was not her job to fix it. She accepted the answer the way children do when they trust the person holding their hand. We spent the rest of the evening in our cabin. My husband built a fire while I made cocoa for our daughter and let her pick the movie we watched on the small television. The three of us sat close together on the couch, and for the first time in days, the storm inside me began to slow. I did not cry. I did not rage. I simply sat with my family and let the quiet settle around us like the snow outside. The next morning, we packed the car while most of the others were still asleep. Dorothy came out of her cabin as we were loading the last bags. She handed me a small loaf of the bread she had baked and told me to drive carefully. She did not say she was sorry for what had happened. She just said that choosing yourself sometimes looks like walking away, and that there was no shame in that. I thanked her and promised to send her a picture of our daughter when we got home. Stephen Hayes was clearing snow from the main path when we drove past. He raised a hand in a small wave. I waved back. He had not spoken up for me, but he also had not played the part my mother had written for him. That small refusal felt like its own kind of witness. The drive down the mountain was slow because of the snow, but we made it home by evening. In the weeks that followed, the phone stayed mostly quiet. My mother sent one text saying she hoped I had calmed down and that we could talk when I was ready to listen. I did not answer. My father called once late at night when he thought I might be asleep. He left a voicemail that was mostly silence, and then a quiet, "I am sorry it went that way." He did not say he disagreed with my mother. He just sounded tired. I saved the message, but did not call him back. Spring came, and with it the usual round of family invitations. There was no Easter gathering at my parents' house with my name on the list. There was no summer weekend planned at the lake house that included us. The automatic belonging I had spent years protecting by staying quiet was gone. At first, the absence felt like a hole. Then slowly, it started to feel like space. My husband and I started taking our daughter on small trips of our own, just the three of us. We went to state parks and stayed in simple cabins where no one expected us to perform a version of family that did not fit. I started seeing my therapist again this time without hiding it or apologizing for the cost. Our daughter asked questions sometimes about why we did not see Grandma and Grandpa as much, and I answered as honestly as I could without turning her into a messenger. She seemed to understand more than I expected. One afternoon in early summer, I was sitting on our back porch while our daughter played in the yard. My phone rang with a number I did not recognize. It was my cousin Rachel, someone I had not spoken to in years, because she lived on the other side of the state and had always stayed out of the family drama. She told me she had heard what happened at the retreat from one of the cousins who had been there. She said it had not sat right with several people, including her. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was getting there, She said if I ever wanted to bring our daughter to visit her side of the family, the door was open. It was not a grand gesture. It was simply one person choosing to see me clearly instead of through my mother's version of the story. That small choice from someone who did not have to make it mattered more than I could have explained. It did not fix the larger loss. It did not bring back the automatic invitations or the easy belonging I had once tried so hard to preserve. But it reminded me that not everyone in the family had agreed to the role my mother had written for me. Months later, on a quiet evening when our daughter was asleep and my husband was reading in the next room, I sat at the kitchen table and let myself feel the full shape of what had happened. I had spent years believing that staying quiet was the only way to keep the family from falling apart. In the end, the silence had only protected the parts of the family that needed the dysfunction to continue. By walking out of that lodge with our daughter's hand in mine and my husband beside me, I had broken the cycle for the three of us. The cost was real. I no longer had the version of family that sent group texts and planned holidays without asking. But I had something steadier in its place. My mother had tried to shame me back into the role she preferred. Instead, she had shown me exactly why that role had never fit. I did not fight her in the lodge. I did not raise my voice or expose secrets or try to win the room. I simply refused to participate in my own humiliation and left with the people who mattered most. That choice did not feel dramatic or heroic. It felt like the only honest thing I could do. The snow on the Blue Ridge Mountains melted eventually, the way snow always does. The cabin we rented that winter is still there, probably booked by other families who will arrive with their own hopes and their own silences. I do not know if my mother ever understood why we did not come back. I do not know if she ever will. What I do know is that the quiet I chose after that night felt different from the quiet I had practiced for years. This one did not come from fear. It came from clarity. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself whole, I would love to hear how you found your way through it. Drop enough in the comments if this story stayed with you, and let me know what you would have done in that lodge when the microphone turned toward you.